This is
Make it plain.
MIP
With Masamela Matfumo.
Mark Thompson. Get woke.
Folks, a real pleasure to have a very special guest today, not only because of the book she's written and the research she's doing, the way she's educating us all, but also, perhaps most importantly, we have a couple things in common. She went to college in Nashville, across the street from where I was going to high school. Even though we're not that far apart in age at all.
No, we are not.
We're not. We absolutely are not. She was at Vanderbilt University while I attended University School of Nashville. Now she is on the faculty, law professor at one of my alma maters, Georgetown University, Hoya Saxa. And those are the things that are important, of course, and we appreciate that. But we want to talk about some great work she's doing, some great research she's doing. And she's doing it in such a way that it will continue to inform our people, inform our movement, as a matter of fact. And so we want to get into it. Her book is entitled White Space, Black Hood, Opportunity, Hoarding, and Segregation in the Age of Inequality. Professor Sheryll Cashin joins us now from Washington, D.C. Professor, how are you this morning?
I'm good. God is good, Reverend Mark. It's so good to be with you.
It is a pleasure, and it's a pleasure to have you. Good to be with you as well. Want to start this way, and I guess it's good to renew our knowledge of how some of our living spaces where we reside as Black people even came to be in the first place. And, a lot of people throw the terms around gentrification, urban renewal, African-American removal. But it seems we've never really had any self-determination as a people, have we, when it comes to where we live and reside and raise our families, right?
That's absolutely right. I mean, one of the central messages of this book, I call the people who descended from the enslaved descendants, and I call the people trapped in high poverty Black neighborhoods, especially, I call them descendants. It's a term of love, right? But the message is every time this country seemed to have put to bed a peculiar Black subordinating institution, it created another one. From slavery to Jim Crow to the iconic Black hood. And my point is that the primary response of this country to the great migrants, more than 6 million Black people moving north and west to escape the violent back Jim Crow, was to contain them in their own neighborhoods, right? And contain them using violence, racial restrictive covenants, discrimination, all manner of means, and then to cut those neighborhoods off from the kind of resources and subsidies that were rained down on white neighborhoods. So absolutely. And in the 20th and 21st century, the primary experience of Black American descendants has been defined by segregation, right? Even if you make so-called good money, right? Even, Black people making six figures are more likely to live in neighborhoods with the accoutrements and resources that white people making 40,000 get. So I argue in this book that we have a system of residential caste that was created to contain Black people, but it's still going on, and everybody is ensnared in it.
A term that has become popular lately too, and Ta-Nehisi kind of brought even more into popularity. Full disclosure, I'm someone who's very active in the reparations movement, and these issues come up. And one term that's often thrown about is redlining. but you're going into even before that. Talk to us a little bit more about, and that's important because we laud the Great Migration. That's an important part in our history. But you just said something a lot of people don't deal with. The plan was, okay, they coming up here, from what I hear you saying, but we got to control this. They can't. They're not just going to go anywhere they want to go, right?
Absolutely. So the South had a system of social control that was Jim Crow. The residential patterns were actually, there wasn't that much residential segregation in the South, but they had Jim Crow to keep Black people in their place, right? So the North, Midwest, and West, when they had a critical mass of Black people coming, they created a residential system to contain and control Black people. The, so-called, the hood. When I say ghetto, I don't use it as a pejorative. It is just a descriptor. The demographers define a ghetto as a place where 40% or more of the people who live there are poor, right? Concentrated Black poverty was constructed by federal government policies, intentionally constructed, right? So it's a mechanism of social control. And what I said, residential caste, government to this day overinvests and excludes in affluent white space and disinvests and contains and frankly preys on people in high poverty Black and brown neighborhoods. And then they tell stories about the people who live in the hood to justify the way things are. And so that the main decisions, you talked about redlining, starting in the 20s, starting in the teens, right? When you get this critical mass of Black people coming, and I show this in lots of different cities in the book. They try racial zoning. Supreme Court strikes that down. Then they do restrictive covenants. But the redlining was the federal government marking virtually all Black neighborhoods with a D, the lowest rating. And they said explicitly, hazardous, right? Black people were marked as hazardous, and their neighborhoods overnight start experiencing disinvestment, and we've been in it was a recent Fed study, which found that all of the Black neighborhoods marked with the D 8 decades ago, to this day, it correlates with disinvestment, decline, segregation. So we're living with those policies today. And my main message is, government created this system, and to this day, it still invests in segregation and containing people and preying on people and over-investing in affluent white space.
You said the federal government kind of established this. Tell us a little more about that, and who was in power making those decisions at that time.
All right. So prior to the 30-year mortgage, the 30-year mortgage didn't exist in the 20s, in the 30s, right? You basically had to have enough money to buy a house almost with cash or over 10 years, right? So the federal government, this is part of the New Deal, wanted to bring home ownership to the masses, the white masses. And what did they do? They said to insurance company, to lenders, look, we will insure the repayment of loans, of 30-year loans, but we won't do it. We will only do it in homogeneous majority white areas. Black people are risky. Mixed areas are risky. Right? So this was the largest, infusion of subsidy for home ownership at that point in the country. And suddenly, in places like New York City, it became cheaper if you could get a government-backed mortgage, FHA-backed mortgage, HOLC-backed mortgage. It was cheaper to move out to the suburbs and buy a home and gain equity than to rent, right? But that singular wealth-building program, subsidized by the government, they cut Black people out of it. Same with Veterans Administration-backed loans, right? And that was what redlining is. So that's what gets them started, right? And then they mark Black neighborhoods as risky, right? So the distress and disinvestment in Black neighborhoods, people start to associate those conditions with Blackness, right? It's so they actually made the avoidance by whites of having Black people as neighbors worse, right? So the prejudice became systematized, and it made it easier for white people to gain wealth and escape living with Black people, and making actually living near Black people abnormal, right?
Yeah.
It actually had been quite normal before they instituted this system.
Yeah. More MIP after this message. I recall too, and folks forgive me, I'm gonna put this out there even though I don't remember all the names, but there have been some conversations about how even it got to the 30 years. Because at one time, and our enslaved ancestors were collateral when loans were given, and it has something to do, if I'm remembering this correctly, even the 30-year number, with the life expectancy of an enslaved ancestor. So somewhere in that, it's been shown that's how they come up with the 30, and that's how you get to that. And folks, I just want to remind my audience, we've talked about the FHA. As people know, Professor, wealth in America, middle classness in America, is defined by home ownership. That's really all there is. And so the people you're describing, the white folks, the FHA loans that they were given that we weren't given, that's how they got established. So when we start talking about social safety nets, reparations for that matter, things that we did not get as a people, folks think white folks just woke up rich. White folks just woke up with wealth and property. No, they got help. This was the incentive, was it not? Right. It wasn't. They didn't just middle class didn't come up under a cabbage patch. I mean, this was like every other modern society or society period. There were things that were put in place: FHA, homesteading, GI Bill.
Right.
We weren't even originally. Yeah, we weren't even originally included in the Social Security. So I just want to remind people that, and this is how that came to be. And then we were um, um, left by the wayside, seemingly never to catch up. And then so obviously this is still ongoing, and it putting us in that position, did it not, Professor? I mean, it becomes self-perpetuating. In many ways, you trying to break out of that cycle, but it still exists today.
Yeah, but I want, what I try to underscore is there are government policies today that encourage. I say that we have a system of residential caste, and there are three main anti-Black practices that undergird it, that keep it going. One is boundary maintenance. I talked about some of the policies that created these boundaries in the past, and some cities, the boundaries are really, really stark, right? If you go in St. Louis, the Del Mar Divide, but a lot of people experience this. Buffalo, you name the cities, like that's the Black side of town. Cleveland, East and West, right? Sometimes it's exceedingly sharp, but we still get racial steering by realtors, discrimination in mortgage lending. Black neighborhoods and Black people are still redlined today. There's a lot of recent studies showing that if you are Black or brown, you can have the same credit as a white person. You are much more likely to be discriminated against and given subprime products rather than normal products that have, low interest rates and traditional lending. We have exclusionary zoning, government subsidized affordable housing complex. The federal government rains down something like $10 billion a year through a tax credit program for building low-income housing. Most of that gets built in communities that already have more than their fair share. So I could go on, but my point is that the federal government to this day, and local governments, still invest in and encourage segregation rather than inclusion, right? So boundary maintenance, right? The other anti-Black process is opportunity hoarding, right? Even in Black-run cities, it breaks my heart. But in Baltimore, there was this, which it had like 6, 7, maybe 8 Black mayors in a row, and a majority of Black people on the city council. When they actually did an analysis and looked at where their community development dollars were going, this Black-run city was spending 4 times as much in white neighborhoods as Black neighborhoods, right? Now, the new mayor, Brandon Scott, is disrupting that, right? Now they're working on racial equity, right? You had to find out that, but in Chicago, white neighborhoods get 3 times as much public and private investment as Black ones, right? The new mayor of Chicago is trying to disrupt that too, right? She has a new, but the systems, we have this mythology in this country that high opportunity neighborhood living is earned, and that hood living is the deserved result of bad choices and bad behavior, when nothing can be further from the truth. We have systems that make it very likely that you will rise and stay on the top of the heap in high opportunity places, and that for those who lost the neighborhood lottery at birth, we have systems that by design that are designed for you to stay in your place and make it very improbable that you'll have social mobility. That's caste.
Yeah. More MIP after this message. And what about you? Because I know you deal with community development, urban renewal. It seems we're also moved about at the will of, I guess, government regulations or corporate America. As I was saying to you before we came on, I was sharing with professor folks, I lived in Washington, D.C. from 1985 to 2010. And I watched Black families who had homes in downtown Washington, even near the White House. Those neighborhoods neglected. Those families sold mom and daddy's homes, forced out in the suburbs in PG County. Now, all those homes are worth millions of dollars, owned by whites in Washington, D.C., and now PG County is run down. So talk to us about that too, how, we migrated to escape Jim Crow, but now it seems there are other factors that are migrating us all over the place, wherever. So it's almost as if, okay, pushing y'all back out to the suburbs. 30 years from now, they might say, you know what? We moving you Negroes back into the city, and we want the suburbs back. But it's as if we have no, really, am I right? It's as if we have no will or any say in that. We're not self-determining at all, right?
Right. Okay, so the professor and me I forgot to tell you the third anti-Black process. Let me just flag it. We could discuss it later. But the third one is surveillance, right? So, boundary maintenance, opportunity hoarding, and then surveillance. Black bodies are surveilled wherever they are, but particularly in high opportunity, high poverty Black neighborhoods. They live in a police state and they're surveilled, right? Okay, now you're talking about displacement of Black people. And it starts with urban renewal, which James Baldwin, my man, I shouldn't do this, but my man, you see him.
Come on, no, that's fine. You should do it. What you mean? You absolutely should.
He's with me all the time, right?
It must be.
He must be. He's the man, must right?
Oh, okay. No doubt. No doubt. Nobody could put together a sentence like James Baldwin.
Exactly.
When I was learning how to write, I tried to model myself after him.
Right.
Lo, I am unworthy, but no one.
Exactly. But the federal government in 50s, 60s, 70s spends $3 billion that it sends down to local communities to displace Black people from strategic neighborhoods, right? And a lot of those neighborhoods were vital, right? They weren't slums, but it's all in the name of slum clearance, but it's Negro removal. And where did those Black people get moved? A lot of them get moved into public housing assigned on a racially a separate and an equal basis. Black people are going to live here, and these projects, and white people are going to live here, right? So that concentrated poverty. Now, displacement now, a lot of it is gentrification, is people getting priced out. and part of the reason that happens is there are not enough policies in place to hold on to the affordable housing that we do have, right? In fact, I hesitate to do it, but there's a certain mayor, not the current one, but another one, of DC. They actually, I think, really wanted to achieve that displacement and bring in higher income people that could pay higher taxes.
Yeah.
They were totally indifferent to making the city inclusive for all types of people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, we have these cycles, right? And all of it relates back to a general vision of separation and segregation being the natural order of things.
Yeah.
As opposed to inclusion, robust inclusion being, that's what cities were like at the dawn of the 20th century. You could find rich people living right next to poor people, black people living right next to white people, right? It's only when the federal government starts this business and you get this exclusionary zoning that the vision of how we live is that certain people are entitled to live in their own enclaves, and everybody else who can't keep up, that's your problem, right?
Yeah.
Well, black people who have less wealth, DC is expensive,
Yeah.
right?
So, right.
It's unbelievably expensive, right? So, me and my husband, we managed to keep up, but it's like two professional family with two paychecks. That's how we keep up, right? But it is and what I say in my last chapter, it's called Abolition and Repair, right? That we need to have a different vision of who the city is for, who any community is for, and that everybody, and particularly, my main point is that we need to change the lens applied to Black people from presumed thug to presumed citizen, and see them worthy of inclusion, see them as assets, three-dimensional human beings who deserve to be included and deserve investment and deserve support in their own liberation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, very, very powerfully put. Let me just ask you about one other city. I dropped my son off in college in Atlanta. And the past,
is that
no, Clark, Atlanta. Clark,
okay.
Atlanta. But I confess, I don't frequent Atlanta. I usually just moving through the airport when I'm changing planes.
Right.
And spending a considerable amount of time to get him settled and moved in, spent some time in the city in August. And I can remember when Atlanta was this bustling Black mecca of a city, hollowed out. Even Black folk moving out to the suburbs. Atlanta Braves even moved to the suburbs. Oh yeah, you know about that? They moved out of downtown.
I haven't been in Atlanta a long time. I used to be there all the time, but I haven't been there in ages.
Well, I think that might be a case study for some of your work. Because I called folk I knew. I said, "What is going on?" And most Black folk live out the downtown area. There's no, and it just seems to me in all these cities, like I live in New York, in DC even, where you are, there's always new development. Now we know it's not for us. None of that is going on in Atlanta. I can't help but wonder if that's because of the Blackness of its political system. I mean, this was a true city where there was Black empowerment, folks being elected to office. It's hollowed out, but it's as if it's waiting for something else to come in to take it over. And most Black folk, I see what's happening, and I don't mean insulting about Atlanta. I may be totally wrong, but it just reminds me of DC in the 80s and 90s. Black folk couldn't wait to get, we're going to go to the suburbs. I'm like, y'all really want to go suburbs, or have you been manipulating the thinking that's what you need to do? Now everybody sorry they sold mom and daddy's house in DC. Them houses worth $5 million out, and mom and daddy raised you in. In Atlanta, suburbs. It's the same thing going on, and it just concerns me once again. Here is an example of some other type of non-self-governance, non-self-determination for us as a people in terms of where we choose to live, what we're choosing to develop, and what is our seat at the table where these decisions are made.
Well, this is a fascinating question, right? And before COVID, many cities, DC included, were becoming like Paris, where the city, particularly a global city, were becoming the playground for rich people, of all colors, but um, and so when people want something, and they're obviously who has power. This is what a caste system is about. Who has power and how is it distributed? And yes, most of the new development in my city, DC, it's luxurious development that for only a slice of
Right.
the very rich people can afford, right?
Right.
And I have that same reaction. Who made these decisions? Who decided that the wharf, the wharf area? You remember the Channel Inn?
Oh yeah. Oh my goodness. Don't get me started. Gone. That was ours.
Channel Inn was where you went to get a steak, Daddy.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah. Yeah.
let's not go there.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. That's right.
it was a place. So that's a cultural institution. But here's
Lord have
now
mercy.
not recognized. It's like it's been desanitized, right? Right, gone. So what I say is what we have in terms of development and who gets what and why. We have direct horizontal competition between communities of great abundance. You notice how Buckhead is trying to secede from Atlanta? Have you followed that story?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In direct competition with everybody else, people who can't afford to buy into luxurious, poverty-free havens. And elites have a way of bending development toward what they want, right? Even like I write about this in the book. That Trump the developer president comes up with these opportunity zones where they're going to do. You get a tax break of 0%, right? You basically get to shelter 100% of the capital gains of your investments in real estate, and this is supposed to channel investment into high poverty areas, and it's riddled with loopholes. And turns out, a lot of what happens from opportunity zones is this luxury development that's adjacent to poverty areas, right? So it just goes on and on.
Yeah.
We need a vision of racial equity and inclusive development and you're into reparations, right? All right. I call for repair. The beauty of once you understand residential caste and how it operates, the way forward is clear. You just have to reverse these anti-Black processes. So, inclusionary zoning rather than exclusion, right? Greenlining of historically defunded Black neighborhoods rather than redlining, right? Historically defunded Black neighborhoods that were marked with the D 80 years ago should be first in line for any new infrastructure dollars, any new community development dollars, right? Children trapped in high poverty schools, they should be getting extra, right? I'm more interested in disrupting the systems that harm people now, frankly, than getting anyone a check for being a descendant of a slave person.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so I give examples of some cities that are going in a different direction than what we're talking about, right? There are quite a number of cities now require a racial equity analysis in their budgeting to make it to be clear about how are we spending money and who are we spending it for, right? But you have to be empowered. It's Chocolate City we don't have Chocolate City in DC anymore. We don't.
Chocolate chip.
Right. But my point is, on the city council, we used to have a majority Black run city council. Not anymore, right? So you do have to have multiracial power that gets you a majority on the city council. You do need to elect mayors who, have a rainbow of progressive multiracial power behind them to say, we're going to start doing things differently and we're going to value everyone, and we're going to build a 21st century inclusive city that has a lot of different types of housing, right? That invests more in high poverty places and to give those people a chance. Some cities are doing simple things like making the bus routes from the poorest neighborhoods free. Just so you have a chance to get. This is the kind of vision I'm talking about, right?
Yeah. No, you're right. As a matter of fact, and folks, I meant to take a picture of this when I was in Atlanta. I'm gonna do it next. I'm gonna be there next week, and I'm gonna do it.
Mm-hmm.
The Mercedes-Benz Stadium is practically sits within the Atlanta University Center complex.
Really?
And the statue of Dr. King with releasing the dove that you see when you drive into the Atlanta University complex, Atlanta University Center complex, Mercedes-Benz Stadium is right across from that. And there's a photograph I meant to take of Dr. King and him being engulfed behind him with this Mercedes-Benz Stadium, the very example of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And see, then the question becomes, well, what is their plan over here? You put a Mercedes-Benz Stadium next to an HBCU area. What ultimately are you really thinking about doing? I'm just putting that out there, folks, for us to examine. You are, and I mean, you're a law professor.
Right.
And folks, my next you read my mind in terms of some policy changes. By the way, on the issue of reparations, I agree. I am an HR 40 proponent. In fact, we'll be in Atlanta next weekend for reparations retreat. When we get finished talking, I may invite you because we're going to have other professors. No, because most of us. This is where we are. There's a segment of people who really ain't us, but have some other agenda. Who say check. Every black person gets checked in a COVID economy. That's gone. You're gonna pay some bills. That's not generational wealth. That's not the FHA and the GI Bill and other Homestead and other folk got. Most of us understand that what we need is repair in all of these areas. And see, you frankly have made another argument in that regard. HR 40 not only includes enslavement, Professor, but the vestiges, the offspring. So everything you've listed is an ongoing vestige. And so the toll just keeps ticking.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's not one check you can give each of us individually that can cover all that, but there can be an establishment of programs, some of which you suggested, to build and establish it. So I just want to lay that out. And I think what you shared is important. But you are a law professor. So I have to ask, are you also making an argument, or do you also see legal jurisprudence remedies, lawsuit remedies? I mean, do we need to also go to the courts or what?
First of all, let me say I was a law clerk to Thurgood Marshall his last year on the court. Right?
Oh, I didn't know that. I'm sorry, I didn't know that. God bless you.
No, but it was just one of the best years of my life. Right? I do think there's a place for the kind of work that LDF does every day. They're fighting the battle on so many fronts, right? Voter suppression, all manner of inequality. There's a place for that, right? But I think we are not going to get abolition of anti-Black processes, including humanization and care in law enforcement, without mobilizing political power to adopt different policies and strategies, right? And the federal court is filled now with Trump appointees. I don't have a lot of hope for getting. I mean, look at Brown v. Board, right? A transformational decision, right? And I actually, you and I are same generation. I'm just a few years older than you, but I lived the dream of well-resourced, integrated public education in Huntsville, Alabama, and the high school I went to, they had to tear it down because it became so impoverished. It became an apartheid school that no one wanted to go to, right? So the division of Brown was there, but it's been betrayed, because first of all, the judiciary, I saw this working for Justice Marshall. They decided it was time to get out of the business of policing school desegregation and making school districts integrate.
Right.
Right. So I think you really, I come from a civil rights agitating family.
That's right.
And each generation has to get up and fight and mobilize. And I believe I really like what Stacey Abrams is doing, and others. Was like, I'm going to run for office.
That's right.
And I'm going to gather my power, and I'm going to excite people. My father ran for governor against George Wallace.
I know, yeah. And your what was your great grandfather?
He was a Reconstruction legislator in Alabama. My great grandfather, right? But and I'm so excited by all these people who are just saying, okay, I'm going to run.
Right.
I'm going to run for office. I'm going to convince people. Who's the black senator? I'm forgetting his name.
Raphael Warnock.
Yeah. Reverend Warnock. Right.
Yeah.
I really, if we don't continue to mobilize power and change policies, we're lost, right?
Indeed.
We'll just get more of the same. So, law is there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we have enough lawyers to lawyer up and sue to combat all of the injustice that is in this society, right?
Yeah. I hear.
But I want to end on a hopeful note, right?
Please.
The summer of 2020, we had 20 million people in this country rising up all over the country, raising signs saying Black Lives Matter, right? New York Times says it was the largest social protest in the history of this country. And I thought when I was writing this book that I said, the way to transformation is, one, you had to change the lens on which people see Black people, and then you had to gather power and just reverse these anti-Black policies. I thought the hardest part was getting people to see Black people the way I was taught to see them, with love, with King's agape love. But I was raised to believe that Black people could do anything if they had the opportunity, right? But to change the lens from presumed thug to presumed citizen, I thought that was the hardest part. But after poor George Floyd's slow assassination, I could see that not everybody, but there was like a critical mass of white people who were horrified and said, this is not the country I want to live in, right? And the beauty is, you don't have to convince every white person. You just need enough of them to join your coalition. And if you look at Reverend Warnock's successful campaign, you look at Biden centered racial justice when he ran. I mean, he's having trouble getting stuff done. But I think we're nearing a tipping point, and we have to keep gathering that power. And frankly, there's some older whites that just can't handle the loss of centrality of whiteness. They're not going to live forever. So.
That's right. Well, and I also think too, as we close, we're in this debate now about Build Back Better and infrastructure, and unfortunately, and this is what it means by being holistic. Your research could have informed that, right away. We're talking about putting infrastructure dollars in human infrastructure. Let's greenline those places that were redlined.
Right.
Let's talk about. I mean, people still in Nashville today talk about. That's just one example. How the highway itself was a form of segregation and cutting through the black community, right. Cutting it off. I mean, so even sometimes infrastructure historically has done that. Folks, we invite you to check out White Space, Black Hood. I know this will not be the last time Professor Cashin and I talk, not only because she is a Hoya, but her folks went to Fisk. I'm going to get your parents' names. I know your father's name is John, but I'm sure some of my folk know your folks. If they went to Fisk. But we thank you for what you have done. Folks, we should read this. We should be informed. We're not even talking about, I know some of us have some misgivings about what the Biden administration is not doing, but we've not even contemplated what Professor Cashin has put before us in this conversation. And we need to continue to mature, enlighten, and educate ourselves so we can have these discussions and raise these issues when we're using or trying to exert our political power for policy. White space, black hood, opportunity hoarding, and segregation. The history of the American racial residential caste system, the residential caste system, very, very important. Professor Cashin, thank you so much for joining us on Make It Plain.
Thank you, Reverend. I've loved it.
I loved it as well. Thanks for getting woke and listening to Make It Plain. Please remember to listen, like, and wherever you get your podcasts, please give the show a 5-star rating. And please do spread the word. Let's all continue to pray for each other during this pandemic and this police-demic. If all hearts and minds are clear, it has been made plain.
Be a barbecue hero with delicious, ultra-low net-carb Hero Bread, buns, and tortillas. Soft and fluffy, high in fiber, and with 0 grams of sugar, up to 10 grams of protein, coming in at under 100 calories per serving. Oh, and did I mention they taste like their mouth-watering traditional versions? I mean, what's not to love? Use code AH10 for 10% off your first Hero Bread purchase at hero.co. That's AH10 for 10% off at hero.co.